I'm Caroline, 34 female. I live in a quiet suburban town with my husband, Nathan, and our bright, bubbly 7-year-old son, Archie. I work from home as an architectural drafter, a job that lets me be there for Archie when he gets off the school bus every afternoon. For a long time, I thought my life was a carefully constructed blueprint for happiness, but I was about to find out that someone was secretly trying to demolish it from the inside out, using my own son as their wrecking ball. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The foundation of my misery was built during Sunday dinners. Every week, without fail, we would go to my mother-in-law Georgia's house. It was a non-negotiable tradition that Nathan, bless his conflict-averse heart, insisted was crucial for keeping the peace. In hindsight, it was less about peace and more about a weekly surrender. Georgia's house was a museum of passive aggression, with her as the smiling, perfectly coiffed curator. She was a pillar of her local community, organizing charity bake sales and volunteering at the library. To the outside world, she was a saint. To me, she was a storm cloud in a cashmere sweater. Her criticisms were never direct. They were little barbs wrapped in compliments, delivered with a sweet smile that never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. "Caroline, this casserole is so simple. It's wonderful that you don't fuss over complicated things," she'd say, placing her own elaborate, multi-layered dish on the table. Or, "That dress is so bold on you. I wish I had your confidence to wear such vibrant colors." Each comment was designed to make me feel small, unsophisticated, and inadequate. Nathan would just chuckle, completely oblivious, saying, "That's just Mom's way." The real focus of her attention, however, was Archie. She doted on him in a way that felt less like love and more like a performance. She'd buy him extravagant toys we'd specifically asked her not to, then sigh dramatically when we explained that we were trying to teach him the value of things. "Oh, of course," she'd say, her voice dripping with faux understanding. "I just want my grandbaby to have everything, but you're the mother, you know best." The unspoken addendum was always, "And look how poorly you're doing it." She constantly questioned my parenting choices, framing them as concerns for Archie's well-being. If Archie had a scraped knee from playing outside, she'd gasp and ask if I was watching him properly. "Boys will be boys," I'd say lightly, but she'd just shake her head with a look of profound disappointment. If he was a picky eater one night, she would offer him a chocolate bar, tutting under her breath, "He needs his energy. Poor thing is probably starving." She was planting seeds of doubt, not just in my mind, but in Nathan's. After these dinners, the drive home was often tense. Nathan would bring up her concerns, not as accusations, but as points for discussion. "Maybe Mom has a point about his bedtime," he'd suggest. "She did raise 2 successful sons." I tried to talk to him about it, to explain that her comments weren't helpful suggestions but a systematic undermining of my authority as a mother. He just couldn't see it. To him, Georgia was a loving, if slightly overbearing, grandmother. "She's from a different generation, Caroline," he'd say, a phrase that became his go-to defense for her behavior. "She just expresses her love differently." But it didn't feel like love. It felt like a subtle, relentless campaign to prove that I was an unfit mother, and that she, the matriarch, was the only one who truly knew what was best for Archie. The tension escalated a few months before everything exploded. I had started a new, complex project at work that required intense focus. It meant my hours were a bit more demanding, and I was admittedly more tired than usual. I was still juggling everything: school runs, homework help, cooking, cleaning, but the strain was beginning to show. Georgia noticed, of course. She saw my fatigue not as a normal part of being a working parent, but as a weakness to exploit. Her comments became more pointed. "You look exhausted, dear. Are you sure you're getting enough sleep? Archie needs his mother to be present." One Sunday, Archie had a slight cough. It was nothing more than a common cold, but Georgia treated it like a symptom of critical neglect. She spent the entire dinner checking his temperature, wrapping him in blankets, and glaring at me every time he sniffled. "Children are so fragile," she announced to the table. "They need constant vigilance." I tried to set boundaries. I suggested we move the Sunday dinners to every other week, framing it as a way to give everyone a break. George's reaction was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. Her eyes welled up with tears. "Oh," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I just thought seeing my family was important. I suppose I'm just an old woman who gets in the way." Nathan immediately rushed to her side, comforting her and shooting me a look that said, "See what you did?" I felt a surge of frustrated anger. I was being painted as the villain for simply wanting a little space, a little respite from her constant judgment. I backed down, and the weekly dinners continued, each one feeling more like a court summons than a family gathering. The week before the knock on the door, the dinner was particularly awful. Archie had been chosen to have a small solo part in his school play, and he was bursting with excitement. He stood in the middle of George's living room, proudly reciting his 2 lines. I was beaming, telling him how proud I was. Georgia watched with a tight smile. "That's lovely, dear," she said to Archie. Then she turned to me. "I do hope his schoolwork isn't suffering with all this theatrical distraction." "His teacher, Molly, did you say her name was? I hope she's keeping a close eye on his academics." It was a classic Georgia move, taking a moment of pure joy and injecting it with anxiety and doubt. I reassured her that his grades were excellent and Molly was a wonderful teacher, but the damage was done. The happy bubble had been popped. On the drive home, I told Nathan I couldn't do it anymore. I was emotionally drained. "I need a break from her, Nathan, just for a few weeks." He sighed, that familiar, weary sound of a man caught between his wife and his mother. "Okay, Caroline," he finally agreed. "We'll skip next week. I'll tell her we have other plans." I felt a sliver of relief, a tiny victory. I had no idea that in George's mind, my request for a boundary wasn't a victory. It was a declaration of war, and she was about to launch a counterattack so devastating it would threaten to tear our entire world apart. The knock came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was a crisp autumn day, and the sunlight was streaming through the windows of my home office. I was in the zone, finalizing a set of blueprints with a cup of tea steaming beside me. Archie was at school, and the house was quiet, a rare and precious commodity. The sound was sharp, authoritative, not the friendly rap of a neighbor or the rhythmic tap of a delivery driver. I felt a strange prickle of unease as I walked to the door. When I looked through the peephole, I saw 2 people, a man and a woman, dressed in professional but somber attire. They were holding clipboards. My heart began to beat a little faster. I opened the door and the woman offered a tight, practiced smile. "Are you Caroline Miller?" she asked. "Yes," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We're from Child Protective Services," she continued, her tone neutral but heavy with implication. "We've received a report concerning the welfare of your son, Archie Miller. We need to come in and speak with you." The world tilted on its axis. Child Protective Services. The words echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of my mind. It felt like a mistake, a prank, a scene from a movie. This didn't happen to people like me, to families like ours. There must be some misunderstanding, I stammered, my hand gripping the door frame for support. "My son is fine. He's at school right now." The man spoke this time, his voice gentle but firm. "We understand this is upsetting, ma'am. That's what we're here to determine. May we please come in?" Numbly, I stepped aside and let them into my home. The house that had been my sanctuary only moments before now felt like a crime scene, and I was the primary suspect. They sat on my living room sofa, the one where Archie and I snuggled to watch cartoons, and opened their folders. The woman, whose name was Ms. Thompson, did most of the talking. She explained that they had received an anonymous tip from a concerned party detailing allegations of neglect. Neglect. The word was a physical blow. She listed the claims, and each one was more absurd and horrifying than the last. The report stated that Archie was often left home alone for hours at a time, that he was consistently sent to school in dirty clothes and without a proper lunch, that our home was unsanitary and unsafe, that I was emotionally volatile and often seemed overwhelmed and incapable of caring for him. I stared at her, my mind struggling to process the fiction she was reciting. "That's not true," I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. "None of that is true. I work from home. I'm always here when Archie isn't at school. He's a happy, healthy little boy. You can see the house is clean." My voice rose with panic as I gestured around the tidy living room. Ms. Thompson just nodded, her expression unreadable. "We have to investigate every claim, Mrs. Miller. It's our legal obligation." They asked to see Archie's room. I led them upstairs, my legs feeling like lead. I watched as Hay looked at his neatly made bed, his bookshelf filled with stories, his box of Lego creations on the floor. To them, it was just a room to be inspected. To me, it was the heart of my world, and they were treating it like an exhibit. They went through my kitchen, opening the refrigerator and the pantry, making notes on their clipboards. I felt violated, exposed. Every corner of my life was being scrutinized by strangers who held the power to take my child away. They asked me a barrage of questions about my work schedule, my mental health, my relationship with Nathan, and my parenting methods. I answered them as calmly as I could, but inside I was screaming. Who would do this? Who would tell such monstrous lies? The term concerned party kept ringing in my ears. And then a cold, sickening realization began to dawn. The specific nature of the complaints, the comments about me seeming overwhelmed, the focus on Archie's well-being, it all sounded so familiar. It was Georgia's narrative, twisted into a formal, anonymous complaint. The timing was too perfect. Just days after I had finally stood up to her and canceled our Sunday dinner, this happens. It couldn't be a coincidence. When I voiced my suspicion, trying to explain the difficult relationship I had with my mother-in-law, Ms. Thompson's expression didn't change. "We hear that a lot, Mrs. Miller," she said coolly. "Family disputes can be messy, but our only concern is the child." Her professional detachment felt like an accusation in itself. It didn't matter what I said, I was just another defensive parent in their files. The interview lasted for what felt like an eternity. Before they left, they informed me of the next steps. They would need to interview Archie at his school, without me present. They would also speak to his pediatrician and his teacher. And they would need to speak with my husband, Nathan. They would be in touch. As soon as the door closed behind them, I collapsed. The strength I had been holding onto completely dissolved, and I was left with raw, gut-wrenching terror. The thought of them talking to Archie, of him being scared and confused, was unbearable. What if he said something innocent that they could twist? What if they took him away from me? I called Nathan, my voice choked with sobs. I could barely get the words out. He was horrified, rushing home from work immediately. He held me as I cried, assuring me it was all a ridiculous mistake that we would clear up. But when I told him I was sure it was his mother, he hesitated. "Caroline, come on," he said softly. "My mom wouldn't do this. She can be difficult, but this is insane. She loves Archie." His refusal to believe me, his immediate defense of her, was a second betrayal. It felt like the floor was crumbling beneath my feet. I was alone in this nightmare, and the person who was supposed to be my partner couldn't, or wouldn't, see the monster standing right in front of us. The investigation had begun, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that Georgia's campaign to prove I was an unfit mother had just entered its most dangerous phase. The days that followed the CPS visit were a blur of anxiety. Sleep offered no escape. My dreams were haunted by the image of strangers leading Archie away from me. Every time the phone rang, my heart would leap into my throat. Nathan tried to be supportive, but there was a chasm between us. He attended his own interview with the caseworkers, confidently telling them what a wonderful mother I was, but he still refused to entertain the idea that Georgia was the anonymous caller. He even spoke to her on the phone. "She was devastated, Caroline," he told me afterward. "She was in tears, saying she couldn't imagine who would do something so evil to our family." I just stared at him, marveling at her audacity and his naivety. She was crying because she had been caught in the crossfire of her own attack. The CPS workers, Ms. Thompson and her partner, were thorough. They interviewed Archie at school. The school counselor called me beforehand to explain the process, assuring me it would be handled sensitively. Knowing my little boy was being questioned about his home life, about me, was a unique form of torture. Afterward, Archie seemed unfazed, mostly excited that he got to miss math to talk to some new people and draw pictures. They also spoke with his pediatrician, who confirmed he was a healthy, well-cared-for child who had never missed a checkup. Each piece of evidence that cleared my name felt like a small victory, but the cloud of the investigation still loomed over us. The final piece of their puzzle was Archie's teacher, Molly. They had an appointment to speak with her on Friday. That Thursday evening, the atmosphere in our house was thick with unspoken tension. Nathan and I were moving around each other like ghosts, the topic of his mother, a toxic, untouchable subject. We were going through the motions of a norm. All family evening, but nothing felt normal. After putting Archie to bed, I was tidying up the kitchen when Nathan's phone, which he had left on the counter, buzzed. It was a voicemail notification. Normally, I would never dream of checking his phone, but we shared a family plan, and his voicemails were often transcribed and sent as texts to both of our devices. I glanced at my own phone and saw the text preview of the transcription. It was from a number I didn't recognize. The text was garbled, as transcriptions often are, but a few words jumped out at me. Molly, school, help Archie, so worried. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Molly, his school. Why was a stranger leaving a voicemail about Archie's teacher? Acting on pure instinct, I picked up Nathan's phone. My hands were trembling as I navigated to his voicemail and pressed play. The voice that filled the quiet kitchen was instantly recognizable, even though it was hushed and conspiratorial. It was Georgia. "Hello, is this Molly?" she began, her voice syrupy sweet. "This is Georgia Miller, Archie's grandmother. I'm so sorry to bother you on your personal number. I hope you don't mind. I got it from a friend on the PTA. I know the authorities are speaking with you tomorrow, and I am just sick with worry." She paused, and I could practically picture her dabbing at a fake tear. "Listen," she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "I know things are difficult for Caroline right now. She's a good person, but she's just so overwhelmed. As Archie's teacher, you see him every day. You see how tired he looks, how his clothes are sometimes not quite fresh." My blood ran cold. She was coaching her, feeding her the same lies from the report, but it got worse. "I know teachers don't make nearly what they deserve," Georgia purred, "and I have been looking for a way to show my appreciation for all you do for my grandson. I'd be happy to make a private donation to you, personally, of course, to help with classroom supplies or whatever you need. Let's say $500, just as a thank you for your honesty tomorrow, for confirming that you've also had some concerns. It would mean the world to me to know that someone else is looking out for Archie's best interests." The message ended. She had just tried to bribe a teacher to lie to Child Protective Services, and she had left the evidence on a voicemail. I stood frozen in the kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear. I felt a dizzying mix of vindication and pure rage. This was it. This was the proof. This was the undeniable, irrefutable evidence that Nathan could not ignore. She wasn't just a meddling mother-in-law. She was a malicious, calculating woman willing to break the law and destroy our family to get what she wanted. But then a chilling thought struck me. Whose number had she called? She had asked for Molly, but the voicemail had been left on Nathan's phone. I quickly searched the number online. It belonged to a woman named Molly Peterson, a retired real estate agent who lived 2 towns over. Georgia, in her arrogant haste, had gotten the wrong number. She had found a Molly from a PTA list, probably an old one, and assumed it was Archie's teacher. She had confessed her entire criminal plan to a complete stranger, who had then likely realized the message was not for them and deleted it. But not before the carrier had automatically forwarded it to Nathan's voicemail inbox, possibly as part of a missed call service. It was a 1 in a million blunder. A fatal mistake. I played the message again, my mind racing. I saved the audio file, my fingers flying across the screen. I forwarded the file to my own phone and then emailed it to myself, creating multiple copies. This was my weapon, my salvation. Nathan walked into the kitchen, his face etched with worry. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. I looked at him, the man I loved, the man who had doubted me. I held up his phone. "You need to listen to this," I said, my voice dangerously calm. I pressed play. He listened, his brow furrowed in confusion at first, and then his face paled. The color drained from his cheeks as his mother's voice detailed her venomous plot. The denial, the disbelief he had clung to for so long, shattered. The sound of his mother trying to bribe a teacher to take his son away was the sound of his world breaking. When the message ended, there was a long, heavy silence. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a horror and shame so profound I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Oh my God, Caroline," he whispered. "What has she done?" I looked back at him, the fear that had held me captive for days finally replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "She made a mistake," I said, "and now she's going to pay for it." The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. The terror was gone, replaced by an icy determination. Nathan was a wreck. He had barely slept, pacing the house most of the night, torn between disbelief and a gut-wrenching acceptance of his mother's treachery. He had apologized to me over and over, his voice thick with shame. "I'm so sorry, Caroline. I should have listened to you. I should have believed you." His apology was necessary, but it couldn't erase the hurt of his doubt. For now, however, we had to be a team. The future of our family depended on it. Our first call was to our lawyer. We had put one on retainer the day after the CPS visit, a smart move that now seemed prescient. We explained the situation and played him the voicemail. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. This is unbelievable," he said. "This is not just evidence, this is a confession. Attempting to bribe a witness in a CPS investigation is a serious offense." He advised us on the immediate steps. The first was to get ahead of the official interview with Archie's actual teacher, Molly. We needed to arm her with the truth before she spoke to Ms. Thompson. I called the school and left an urgent message for Molly to call me back. She returned my call within the hour, her voice warm and concerned. "Caroline, I was so sorry to hear about the situation. The principal informed me that CPS would be speaking with me today. Is everything all right?" I took a deep breath. "Molly, something has happened that you need to be aware of. It involves you directly." I explained, as calmly and concisely as I could, what Georgia had done. I told her about the false report, my suspicions, and the voicemail. I described how Georgia had tried to bribe a teacher named Molly to lie about me and had accidentally left the message for the wrong person. There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "My goodness," Molly finally said, her voice laced with disbelief and indignation. "To try and use me, to use the school to hurt a child and his mother, that's despicable." I could hear the steel in her voice. Molly was not someone who would be easily intimidated. She had been a teacher for over a decade and had seen her fair share of difficult family dynamics. "Caroline," she said firmly, "you have nothing to worry about from me. I will tell them the absolute truth, that Archie is a wonderful, happy, and exceptionally well-cared-for child. And I will also tell them about this phone call and your mother-in-law's attempt to manipulate my testimony." Her unwavering support was a balm to my frayed nerves. It felt like I finally had an ally, someone outside the emotional chaos of my family who could see the situation with clear, objective eyes. Nathan and I then made the second, more difficult call, to Ms. Thompson at CPS. We requested an urgent meeting and told her we had new, critical evidence regarding the source and nature of the complaint against us. She agreed to meet us at their office in the afternoon, after she had concluded her scheduled interview with Molly. When we arrived at the drab, institutional building, my anxiety spiked again. This place represented my worst fears. We were led into a small, windowless room and waited. Ms. Thompson came in a few minutes later, her expression as neutral as ever. "Mr. and Mrs. Miller," she began, "I've just come from speaking with Archie's teacher, Ms. Albright." She used Molly's last name, and for a heart-stopping moment, I thought she was a different person. But then I remembered Georgia had only used her first name. Her account of Archie's performance and well-being at school is exemplary. She describes him as a thriving, well-adjusted student. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. She also told me something unusual, Ms. Thompson continued, her eyes narrowing slightly. "She mentioned a phone call she received from you this morning, Caroline, regarding an alleged attempt by the child's grandmother to influence her testimony." This was our moment. "It wasn't an allegation," I said, my voice steady. I took out my phone, my hands surprisingly stable. "We have proof." I explained the story of the voicemail, the wrong number, the accidental confession. I played the audio file for her. As Georgia's syrupy voice filled the small room, detailing her lies and her bribe, Ms. Thompson's professional mask finally slipped. Her eyes widened, and a look of genuine shock crossed her face. She listened intently until the very end, then sat back in her chair, silent for a long moment. "In all my years," she said slowly, "I have never encountered anything quite like this." The tone of the meeting shifted instantly. We were no longer suspects. We were the victims of a malicious, calculated attack. Ms. Thompson explained that this evidence changed everything. A false report to CPS is a crime, but orchestrating it with an attempted bribe was on another level. She made a copy of the audio file for her records. "Based on this evidence and the complete lack of any corroborating evidence for the original claims," she said, her voice now filled with a grim professionalism, "I will be recommending the immediate closure of this case. The finding will be unfounded. Your family will be completely exonerated." Tears of relief streamed down my face. Nathan reached over and squeezed my hand, his own eyes glistening. The nightmare was ending. But I wasn't done. "What about Georgia?" I asked, my voice hardening. "What happens to her?" Ms. Thompson's expression became stern. "Filing a malicious and knowingly false report is a serious offense," she repeated the lawyer's words. "Attempting to bribe or intimidate a witness in a child welfare investigation is even more so. This voicemail is now evidence. We are obligated by law to turn this over to the district attorney's office. Your mother-in-law will have to answer for what she did." The weight of those words hung in the air. This was no longer just a family drama. Georgia had crossed a line into criminal behavior, and now the system she had tried to use as a weapon against me was turning its sights on her. We left the CPS office and stepped out into the afternoon sun, which seemed brighter than it had in weeks. We had won. The case was closed, but the war wasn't over. Now, it was time to plan the final battle. The official letter from CPS arrived 3 days later. The black and white text was the most beautiful thing I had ever read. The word "unfounded" was a shield, a vindication, a final, blessed end to the terror that had consumed our lives. With the case officially closed, a strange calm settled over our house. It was the quiet after a storm, the air still and heavy with what had happened. Nathan was a changed man. The blind spot he'd had for his mother was gone, replaced by a quiet, simmering anger. He was racked with guilt over his initial disbelief, and he threw himself into making it up to me and Archie, his every action a silent apology. Our lawyer informed us that the district attorney's office had received the file from CPS and was reviewing the evidence. He was confident they would press charges against Georgia for filing a false report and witness tampering. The wheels of justice were turning, but they were turning slowly, behind closed doors. And that wasn't enough for me. The legal system would handle the crime, but the betrayal was a personal wound that needed to be addressed. Georgia couldn't just fade away into legal proceedings. She needed to face us. She needed to face the family she had tried to shatter. For 2 weeks, we had complete silence from her. She didn't call, she didn't text. It was a stark contrast to her usual constant presence in our lives. Nathan's brother, David, called a few times, asking why we hadn't been at Sunday dinner and if everything was okay. Nathan was vague, just saying we were dealing with a private family matter. He was protecting his brother from the truth, at least for now. But we knew Georgia must be stewing, wondering why her grand plan hadn't worked, wondering why a social worker hadn't shown up to take Archie away. She had no idea that we held the recording of her crime. She was living in a state of arrogant ignorance, and that was the ground upon which I would build my stage. The plan began to form in my mind, not as a shout of anger, but as a quiet, precise demolition. I wanted to expose her, not just to Nathan and me, but to the family she held in such high esteem. I wanted her to see the full consequences of her actions, mirrored in the faces of the people whose respect she craved. "We need to have one last Sunday dinner," I too. LD Nathan one evening. He looked at me confused. "What? Why would we ever go back there?" "We're not going there," I said. "They're coming here, all of them. Georgia, your father, your brother, we're going to host." He began to understand. A flicker of something apprehension, but also resolve, appeared in his eyes. "A family meeting," he said, nodding slowly. She needs to be held accountable. We decided to frame it as a reconciliation, a chance to clear the air after a period of distance. Nathan made the call. He was brilliant, his voice calm and measured. He told Georgia that we had missed seeing everyone and that there had been some misunderstandings lately that he wanted to resolve. He invited her, his father Frank, and his brother David over for dinner that coming Sunday. Georgia, likely sensing a chance to reassert her control and play the magnanimous matriarch, accepted immediately. She probably imagined a scene where I would offer a tearful apology for being so distant, and she could graciously forgive me, cementing her position as the family's benevolent center. She had no idea she was accepting an invitation to her own downfall. The week leading up to the dinner was surreal. I went about my life, working, playing with Archie, planning the menu with a strange sense of dual reality. On the surface, I was a wife and mother preparing for a family gathering. Beneath, I was a general preparing for a final, decisive confrontation. I decided to cook Georgia's favorite meal, a complicated roast chicken with all the trimmings. It was a petty detail, perhaps, but it felt right. I would serve her a symbol of perfect domesticity, the very thing she accused me of failing at right before I dismantled her world. The most important part of the plan was Archie. I wanted him as far away from this toxicity as possible. I arranged for him to have a sleepover at his best friend's house, a special treat that he was thrilled about. The thought of his innocent ears hearing any of what was about to unfold was unbearable. This was an adult mess, and he would be shielded from it. The final piece of preparation was technical. I bought a small, high-quality Bluetooth speaker, sleek and unobtrusive. I tested it, pairing it with my phone and placing it on the mantelpiece in our living room, partially hidden behind a photo frame. The photo was of Archie, smiling his bright, gap-toothed grin. The sound quality was crystal clear. By Sunday afternoon, everything was ready. The house was spotless. The aroma of roasting chicken filled the air. Nathan and I moved as a single, silent unit, our purpose perfectly aligned. We were both nervous, but it was a sharp, focused energy, not the frantic panic of the past weeks. We were in control now. This wasn't happening to us anymore. We were making it happen. As the clock ticked closer to 6:00 p.m., I stood in the living room and looked at the speaker on the mantel. In my pocket, my phone felt heavy with the audio file that had changed everything. Georgia thought she was coming for a dinner of reconciliation. She was about to be served a feast of consequences. The doorbell rang at precisely 6 o'clock. Georgia was nothing if not punctual. Nathan and I exchanged a final, steadying glance before he opened the door. There they were, Georgia, smiling brightly, holding a bottle of wine as a hostess gift. Nathan's father, Frank, a quiet, stoic man who usually let his wife do the talking, and his brother, David, who looked genuinely happy to be there, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. "There you are," Georgia chirped, stepping inside and enveloping Nathan in a hug that was purely for show. "We were starting to get worried about you too." She turned to me, her smile faltering just a fraction as she took me in. "Caroline, dear, you look well. A bit tired, but well." The familiar jab, so practiced and reflexive she probably didn't even realize she was doing it. I smiled back, a calm, serene expression I had practiced in the mirror. "It's been a stressful few weeks, Georgia, but things are much clearer now. Please come in." We led them into the living room. I had set out appetizers, and for a few minutes we engaged in the bizarre theater of small talk. David asked about my work, Frank commented on the football game, and Georgia surveyed my house, her eyes scanning for any sign of dust or disorder. She was in her element, holding court, completely unaware of the trap that was closing around her. Nathan was a rock, playing the part of the gracious host while I moved in and out of the kitchen, putting the final touches on dinner. We ate in the dining room. The food was perfect, a fact that seemed to mildly annoy Georgia. I kept the conversation light, asking David about his new job and Frank about his golf game. I wanted to lull her into a state of comfort and confidence. I wanted her to feel secure in her position as the family matriarch before I pulled the rug out from under Nathan played his part perfectly, refilling glasses and steering the conversation away from anything too personal, building the tension with an expert patience I didn't know he possessed. Finally, dinner was over. "Why don't we move back to the living room for coffee?" I suggested. My heart was starting to pound now. This was it. As everyone settled onto the sofas, I went to the kitchen to get the coffee tray. Nathan gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was time. I returned and served the coffee, my hands steady. I sat down in an armchair directly across from Georgia. The friendly chatter died down, and a sense of expectation filled the room. "So," David said, looking between Nathan and me. "Nathan mentioned there were some misunderstandings you guys wanted to clear up. Is everything okay?" Georgia seized the opening. "Yes, Nathan," she said, her voice laced with concern as she turned to her son. "We've all been so worried. Your sudden distance, it's not like you. If there's something wrong, you know you can tell your mother." Nathan looked at her, his expression hardening. The time for pretending was over. "There is something wrong, Mom," he said, his voice low and serious. "Something very wrong. A few weeks ago, Caroline and I were visited by Child Protective Services." A collective gasp went through the room. Frank sat bolt upright, and David stared wide-eyed. Georgia, however, arranged her features into a mask of perfect horror. "What?" she cried, placing a hand on her chest. "Oh, my heavens, your poor things! Who would do such a terrible thing?" "That's the question, isn't it?" I said, my voice cutting through the air. "Who would make an anonymous call and claim that Archie was being neglected, that he was dirty, unfed, and unsafe, that his mother was unstable?" I held Georgia's gaze, and for the first time I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. "Well, I can't imagine," she said, her voice a little too high. "It's monstrous." "It is monstrous," Nathan agreed. "It's the act of someone who wants to destroy our family. Someone who would lie to the authorities and risk having our son taken away from us, just to prove a point." David and Frank looked at Georgia, their expressions shifting from shock to confusion. They were starting to connect the dots. "What are you implying?" Georgia asked, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage. "Surely you don't think I—" "We don't think, Mom," Nathan interrupted, his voice like ice. "We know." And with that, I discreetly pressed a button on my phone. The room fell silent. And then, from the speaker on the mantelpiece, Georgia's own voice filled the space, hushed, conspiratorial, and utterly damning. "Hello, is this Molly? This is Georgia Miller, Archie's grandmother." The color drained from Georgia's face. She looked like she had been turned to stone. Frank and David swiveled their heads from the speaker to her, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. We all listened in stunned silence as the recording played out, every venomous word echoing in the quiet room. Her lies about me being overwhelmed. Her fabricated concerns about Archie's clothes. And then, the bribe. "I'd be happy to make a private donation to you, personally, of course. Let's say $500. When the recording ended, the silence that followed was deafening. It was heavier and more absolute than any sound. Georgia sat frozen, her mouth slightly agape, her carefully constructed world shattered around her. Frank was staring at his wife as if he had never seen her before. David just shook his head slowly, his expression one of utter disgust. "You got the wrong number, Georgia," I said softly, breaking the silence. "You left your confession on Nathan's voicemail." Georgia finally moved. She looked at me, her eyes filled not with remorse but with pure, unadulterated hatred. Then she turned to Nathan, her face crumbling into a desperate plea. "Nathan, my son, it was a mistake. I was just worried about Archie. I would never—" "Stop," Nathan said, his voice shaking with a rage I had never heard from him before. "Just stop. You tried to take my son. You tried to destroy my wife. You tried to destroy my family. For what? Because you couldn't stand not being in control?" Frank finally spoke, his voice a low rumble of shame. "Georgia, how could you—" But Georgia wasn't listening. Her eyes were still locked on me, blazing with fury. The mask was gone. The monster was finally visible to everyone. The family meeting was over. And so was her reign. The aftermath in the living room was chaotic and grim. David was the first to react with coherent words, his voice thick with disgust. "I can't even look at you right now," he said to his mother, standing up and walking to the other side of the room as if he couldn't bear to be near her. "Frank, A man I had only known to be quiet and passive seemed to shrink into the sofa, the shame radiating from him in palpable waves. He kept looking from Georgia's stony face to Nathan's, then to mine, as if searching for an escape from the nightmare his wife had created. Georgia, however, after her initial, failed plea to Nathan, switched from desperation to defiance. The victim act evaporated, replaced by a cold, reptilian fury. "You," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You did this. You turned my son against me. You've been poisoning this family since the day you arrived." It was so audacious, so completely devoid of self-awareness that I almost laughed. Nathan stepped forward, placing himself between us. "No, Mom," he said, his voice final. "You did this. You and your jealousy and your need for control. Caroline did nothing but love our son and protect our family from you." The argument that followed was short and brutal. There was no reasoning with her. Every fact was twisted, every accusation deflected. In her mind, she was the victim, and I was the conniving puppet master. It became clear that she was incapable of remorse because she truly believed her actions were justified. Frank finally found his voice and told her they were leaving. The departure was stiff and silent. Georgia didn't look at any of us as she walked out the door, her back ramrod straight. Frank paused at the threshold and looked at Nathan and me. "I am so sorry," he whispered, the words heavy with a lifetime of complicity, and then they were gone. In the silence of their departure, Nathan and I just stood there for a moment, the adrenaline slowly seeping away, leaving us exhausted but united. David walked over to us, his face etched with sorrow. "I don't even know what to say," he said. "I'm sorry, Caroline, for all the times I thought she was just being Mom and didn't see what she was doing to you." It was a moment of unexpected grace, a bridge being built over the ruins Georgia had left behind. The legal consequences for Georgia were swift and unavoidable. With the voicemail as irrefutable evidence, the district attorney charged her with filing a false police report and misdemeanor witness tampering. Our lawyer advised us that given her age and lack of a prior record, she was unlikely to see jail time, but she wouldn't escape unscathed. She ended up pleading guilty to avoid a public trial, receiving 2 years of probation, a significant fine, and a court order to undergo psychological counseling. The most significant part of the sentence, for us, was the permanent restraining order. She was legally barred from coming within 500 feet of me, Nathan, and, most importantly, Archie. The legal system had drawn a boundary that she could never again cross. The fallout ripped through the family. Frank, forced to confront the true nature of the woman he'd been married to for 40 years, moved in with David temporarily. Their marriage, built on his passivity and her control, couldn't withstand the exposure of the truth. I don't know if they will ever reconcile, and frankly, I don't care. David became a tentative but welcome presence in our lives. He would call to check in, and we started seeing him for quiet, casual get-togethers, slowly building a new, healthier family connection, free from Georgia's toxic influence. For Nathan and me, the journey back to normalcy was a process. The trauma of the investigation left scars. For months, the sound of an unexpected knock on the door would send a jolt of anxiety through me. But the ordeal had also forged something new between us. Nathan's blind devotion to his mother was replaced by a fierce, protective loyalty to our little family unit. He saw me, truly saw me, for the first time not as the woman who came between him and his mother, but as his partner and the fierce protector of our child. Our marriage became stronger, more honest, and more resilient than it had ever been. We told Archie a heavily simplified version of the truth, that Grandma Georgia had broken some important rules and needed a long timeout to think about her behavior, so we wouldn't be seeing her anymore. He was young enough to accept it without too many questions, more concerned with his Lego and playdates than with complex adult dramas. We were free. The Sunday dinners were replaced by quiet family weekends, filled with trips to the park, movie nights, and the simple, peaceful joy of being together without the shadow of judgment looming over us. My life was no longer about surviving weekly inspections or bracing for the next passive-aggressive comment. It was just ours. Sometimes I think about that voicemail. A single, colossal mistake born of pure arrogance. Georgia was so convinced of her own cleverness, so sure of her ability to manipulate everyone around her, that she never considered the possibility of failure. She handed me the weapon to her own destruction, and in doing so, she gave my family the one thing she never intended to: peace. My home is a sanctuary once more, the blueprints of our life redrawn, the weak foundation torn out and replaced with something solid, something true. And it's a structure that no storm, no matter how vicious, can ever tear down again.